Welcome back to WagerTalk.com. I'm Marco D'Angelo, joined with Bryan Leonard and Ralph Michaels, and we're going to take a look at handicapping revenge games in college basketball. And guys, revenge is something that's maybe thrown out there a little bit too much, and maybe everybody, overreacts to it. And I know one of the biggest times is when we get to conference tournament time, because you will have some of these conferences where teams may be meeting for the third time, and you might have somebody that swept the regular season, and people will automatically want to look at, they're playing with double revenge in the conference tournament. I want to go to you two guys, and I'll start with you, Ralph, first. Do you look at revenge whenever you're handicapping your games?
I'm going to agree with you with the overused term. I think it's the most overused term in handicapping. And number one, you only have revenge if you were expected to win. Number one, when you're a dog and you lose a game, that's not revenge. My order for revenge is if it's season-ending revenge. If you're getting a non-conference team or you're a conference team and you played them in March Madness and it ended your season, or in the NIT, that's my top revenge. My second most powerful revenge is conference tournament revenge, because you're out of your conference tournament and that is your goal, is to win your conference tournament, get to the NCAAs. And then I look at lone home loss revenge. It doesn't happen often, but those teams that have only one home loss on the year, and they're revenging that team later in the year or even the next year, that is my third most important revenge factor.
Bryan, I'll go to you.
It's funny because on the way to the videos last week, Ralph and I had this discussion. We were discussing it, and Ralph's been a college expert for years, and I was asking him with the conference tournaments coming up what he thought. But it's an overblown. Like I said, I make my own numbers and go from there. But if you find two teams that are relatively even, and one team loses, I would probably look to the other team, give them a slight bit of an edge. Or if it's a blowout situation, you're a good team and you get blown out. That doesn't happen very often. You're going to remember that. As we saw with the Cleveland Browns in the NFL this year, revenge means nothing when you lose all your games. So a lot of people will look at that and I'll say, well, this is a revenge game for this team. Well, if the team loses all the time, you could throw that out the window because they're not thinking that. If you've got a good team, like we talked about in this last video with the Arizona, if UCLA was to come in and beat Arizona at home, that would be a revenge game for Arizona if they would happen to play in the conference tournament. And as we saw with the first matchup, UCLA was beaten at home, so it's a revenge game for there. So it's a true revenge. They remember that loss.
Definitely. Now, and I'll take it a step further, and I agree with you that on the surface, revenge is overused, because every time there's a second meeting, somebody's in revenge, and they're not always going to get it. But I do feel that there are situations in the two that you pointed out at the top, obviously, season ending or conference tournament, you always do that. And we do the same thing in the NFL. If somebody lost to somebody in the playoffs the year before, playoff revenge is always the biggest factor that you look at. But what I do like within season games in these second meetings is looking at what was the circumstances around the first game. Did a team maybe look past the team? Were they coming off a big game, or did they have a big game on deck? And where I like to look is when they played the first time, if one team won, especially if the road team won the first meeting. I want to look and see if there was anything different. Was it a Saturday game, and did that team have maybe a Monday night, big Monday matchup on TV? Because even though there's so many games on TV anymore, when you're on like a Monday or a Tuesday, and it's not a big schedule, and there's, just a handful of games, and you're one of those ones that's on ESPN primetime, that's a big deal for these kids. And I want to look at that. And if there was a situation where a team lost a game, on Saturday because maybe they were playing on Monday or whatever, I will look to maybe back them in the second game. And especially if the road team won the first one, when they come back home, people are going to look and say, all right, they're -7 at home. Well, they won by 10 on the road. If they could beat that team by 10 on the road, they should easily cover the 7 at home. And to me, it doesn't work that way. A lot of times teams will look past them, and especially if you get a blowout. You got the good teams that is late in the season, because as you get to second meetings, generally it's going to be later in the season. A team that blew somebody out on the road, and now they're at home and they're 20-point favorite, there's a lot of times that they are going to take that team for granted, or because it's late in the season, you want to get some of the bench players into the game, season ending, you maybe only have 1 or 2 home games left, and they clear the benches. Those are things that I look at where I will use revenge as an angle.
One more situation I'd like to add, and this may translate more to the NBA than it does college, but it's the way a team handles a win or handles a loss. If you're on the bad side of a beat and the other team is jumping up and down and clapping and laughing like they expected to beat you, you remember that as well. So not only is it the game and the final score, it's how those people treated you. Now, some teams, if you have the better team and your third string is better than your first string, you can't fault them for beating you by 30 points if they're on that night or they're hitting 40, 50% from three-point shots. But it's how a team reacts when they're beating you or when they're pulling the upset. It matters just as much.
All right, good stuff, guys. Appreciate it. And hey, remember, every Friday at Wager Talk, it's Flashback Friday. What's that mean? Well, instead of paying $12 or $20 for our normal prices on our picks, you can get it for just $7. Yes, we roll back the prices on Fridays during basketball season. You can get it for just $7. Check it out each and every Friday, Flashback Friday at wagertalk.com. We'll be back with more here at Wager Talk.